Well, I never thought I was going to play the worst tank in World of Tanks console, and today we're going to be looking at the worst tier 10, at least in my personal opinion, from playing 20,000 battles and trying out a variety of the tier 10s. I haven't got every single one, but I have got like 90% of all of the tier 10s in the game, and I've played pretty much 100% of all of them anyway. So, for this tank, the T110E3, for me, right off the bat, is almost pointless in the first regard, because there is a T110E4, it has a turret, it has, similar armour. The T110E3, the whole premise about the tank is that this thing gets armour, in quotation marks. But you'll find, if you actually grind through any of the tanks leading up to this, that usually that just isn't the case anyway. So you end up with this mismatch of, you're supposed to be this really strong, super turreted, non-turreted tank destroyer that just absolutely decimates and can just sit in front of everything, but then you find you can't just sit in front of anything because they all have premium rounds, and then you end up getting absolutely hammered by pretty much everyone. So there's that. Now, today's two replays are showcasing what happens when you have a good game in this thing, but for every single replay where you have a good game, you have a terrible one. And 90% of the time, it's because you couldn't move, because you're slow. This thing is super slow. It's slower than the T110E4, so, that's probably the easiest comparison we can make. And the T110E4, you're probably looking at about 30 to 35 kilometers an hour, which is not fast by any means, but it is nowhere near slow, and so you're going to have to kind of take that into account when deciding whether or not you want to go towards this. For me personally, I didn't get this knowing that it's going to be really good and I'm going to play it because it's super amazing. It's more of like a very casual kind of play style where maybe you want to try out some different things and have a bit of fun, but you certainly won't be doing well every single game. It's not consistent, to be honest with you, in my personal opinion. Now, there's going to be some of you in the comments that are probably like, the T110E3 is the best tank destroyer in the game. Well, that's obviously your opinion. I'm not saying that my opinion is always 100% right, but from my personal experience, in terms of trying to do well in tanks, this is one that limits the player itself, not necessarily kind of the player limiting themselves. It's actually the tank that limits the player, not the player that limits the tank. And that's something I always hate, because the key thing about World of Tanks in my eyes, and to do the best that you can, is to be super flexible, to be able to move and adapt to the situation, and the T110E3 just is not flexible to start with. Its gun depression is okay for a non-turreted tank destroyer, but it's nowhere near good. And then you've got the thing about not having a turret either. So you've got all of these things that kind of mismatch into one, and yes, you have 850 alpha, but so does the T110E4. So there's no real difference in that regard. And yes, you may see this thing on PC, and I can agree that on PC this thing is actually not too bad because the armor works frontally, and so it's worth choosing the E3 over the E4 in some scenarios, because you're kind of relying upon you bouncing more, whereas in this game, as you're seeing here, we're just getting penned through the front by pretty much everything that actually hits us. So the whole thing about armour on this, it just doesn't really work, because 90% of people at tier 10 are firing premium at you, and the lower plate that is supposedly supposed to be so much better than T110E4 is still not good enough to reliably bounce rounds. And yes, you can wiggle, yes, you can do everything to kind of help negate it, but still, underlying problem is that you still get penned even when doing all of that stuff. So it kind of is a bit of a problem. Now, this is kind of the one scenario where the T110E3 is actually pretty good in terms of its armour, because the lower plate is hidden from all of the opponents, which is one of the key weak points. Tank destroyers with high pen will still pen you straight through the superstructure, so it doesn't actually matter if you're coming up against the tank destroyers with premium. especially and even with standard sometimes, but nonetheless, regarding that, like when you're playing up against mediums like the Leopard 1, the M48, you're able to do kind of what you're seeing here and just be a little bit of a nuisance, just be annoying is like your primary function in the T123, because it's so annoying when you're playing a medium for tanks like the T123 to be sat in front of you in a position where you just can't really do too much, and if you push super hard, you're taking 850 damage, and then you get taken out of the game very quickly, like that Leopard 1 there. So that's kind of, I feel like we've kind of thrown a lot of shade on the T123, and there are some really, really fun moments, and I do enjoy playing the T123, but it is just terrible in my personal opinion, which is why the title is titled what it is, and why I would never really recommend this to pretty much anyone, especially a new player. New players will find this like one of the worst things they could possibly do, so I would never recommend it. But what you can see here is slowly we're racking up the damage, and trust me, it is slow in the T123 to rack up damage, because ultimately, yes, you might have a decent reload for an 850 alpha, but the problem is that you aren't able to get into positions to consistently enable yourself to actually shoot things, and that's one of the things about the flexibility in the game, which is why I always talk about it. You know, if you're able to have, I don't know, 3,000 alpha in one singular shot, but it takes you 50 seconds to reload, and, you know, sometimes you may not be able to shoot anyone after that 50 seconds, so you may have to wait another 30 seconds before you find anyone because you're like 10 kilometers an hour or something. So there's effective DPM, and that's what I like talking about. It's tanks that have both speed and actual damage, whilst also being able to reliably dish out that damage on one singular person. So it's not always sunshine and rainbows with the high alpha. It's kind of a balance, and obviously if you have a balanced tank, then it is good in all regards. But what you're seeing here is a tank that is primarily focused on being heavily armoured, but doesn't really work, and that's why I think that many people have problems with the T123. And you can see here we're having to now advance, which is something that, you know, you have to do in the T123, and actually you have to think about probably 3 times further in advance to any other tank, because you are a lot slower. You can see here doing about 20 kilometers an hour, 20 to 25. I think actually in this tank I've added in the advanced powertrain to boost up the speed as well, because that is one of the key problems. And yeah, that's kind of what I've gone with. And as well as having the equipment with having advanced powertrain, it also boosts your turret traverse or track traverse, so you can actually move quicker, and that's always really important when you're going after some people at the end of the game, or if someone's trying to out traverse you. It's always good to have a little bit of extra turning speed so you're not caught up in that scenario. But having done 5,700 damage, you know, it's not bad, but you could definitely do a lot better and a lot more often in something like even an FV4005 or the T124 like we've mentioned. They're just way better tanks. There is just so many better tanks. I would rather play the Object 268. I would rather play the Object 263. There's just genuinely so many better tanks that I'd rather play than this. And that's kind of what the topic of the video is. So, of course, the key thing is I want to find out whether you guys agree. Maybe I've just completely got the T123 wrong and that it doesn't always get penned, but I find myself losing a lot of hit points to tanks that I genuinely think would never pen, even when you're angling and going up slopes and stuff like that and down slopes and just making it super difficult for them to pen you. It just still doesn't make a difference. But that's one gameplay. Let's look at another one to kind of see if it continues. Now then, Malinovka, not your typical tank destroyer gameplay, but nonetheless a fairly decent map, and I'm going to skip forward a little bit in this replay because you don't want to watch me go into the position. It'll just take ages. Now then, it's taken a minute and a half and we are finally in position, and I mean, if that just doesn't scream how annoying, I don't know what does. But yeah, a minute and a half just to get into position before you can even impact the game, and a lot can actually happen in a minute and a half within World of Tanks console, because 90% of people end up actually throwing themselves away, or you may just not get the chance that a lot of the other TDs and even like mediums, light tanks get the opportunity to do, because they're just in position way faster than you and there's nothing you can really do. But regardless of that, maybe we'll see a decent result coming out. But one thing I do love about the E3 is, of course, the accuracy. The accuracy is fairly decent, although you'll see some really annoying things coming into this replay on the later side where we get a little bit unlucky, but have to stay tuned for that. But one of these kind of key positions I like taking on this map is to go for this kind of area here. It's not necessarily the best place for a T110E3. I should potentially go up the hill, but that could genuinely take like 3 minutes to get up to the top of the hill, and by then the enemies could have pushed over, and so I just don't like the risk of going up the hill. Like if you decide to do it but then your teammates aren't going with you, it just ends up being a rout, and then you get taken out super quick, because as soon as people get around the side armor of this, then it's all over. But nonetheless, we picked up some damage on the Pantera, and that's always a nice little spot at the beginning of the game that you can take to get some extra damage. Now then, with the TVP VTU, the worst tier 8 in World of Tanks console, I would assume, we'll go for the nice little shot, and of course we set him on fire, because one bad tank to another, it's always good to send him back to the garage so he doesn't have to play that tank anymore. But nonetheless, we've got a Manticore now moving forward. That is a tank that is pretty annoying to kind of play against, but we land a nice successful shell into him. And of course, the key thing about this tank is you need to be really good at aiming. If you can't aim properly, the T110E3 will be even more painful. And I don't mean just like aim properly, I just mean like if you can consistently hit your shells, then the E3 is not terrible. But if you do struggle with aiming, or maybe you're not very good at hitting people on the move, or maybe you haven't had that much practice in World of Tanks in the last year, probably starting off with the E3 is not the best idea, because you will find it very difficult, and often you end up getting kind of sausage sandwiched, and just basically you fire, then someone just realizes that you fired, and then you've got 14 seconds before you reload, by which time they've got around the back of you, and then they're farming your nice backside. But yeah, having done 4,050 damage in this game, we're going to see the next bit that is the problem with the E3, and this is something that I always struggle with in World of Tanks when playing really slow tanks, is predicting where the game is going to go, so that you aren't ending up with stale sections of the game where you're not really doing anything, and you kind of have to move in and make up the ground in the meantime, so that when you are reloaded or you are able to impact the game, you can straight away without having to do things like this, where you kind of just wasted space really on the battlefield. So that's one thing I always kind of implore you guys to do, is to think ahead, and we obviously didn't do that within this replay. We were too focused on trying to farm out that piece of damage, when maybe it would have been better to get into position quicker and dealt with them that way. But the worst thing in this game is trying to chase after tanks, and of course what are we doing at the end of the game? Chasing after tanks. And with a couple of teammates on our team, we've got what, like 5 tanks and 2 artillery pieces, we're probably going to win this game regardless. We'd have to do some really bad, terrible things to actually throw it away at this point. But with the Manticore actually moving forward, maybe we'll be able to get a little bit lucky, maybe we won't, and yeah, definitely not with that sort of aim there. But we spot the actual tank destroyer on the enemy team. It's an Object 268, a fantastic tank, much faster than this one, hence why he's been able to leave that flank and actually end up on the other side of the map, whilst we've literally gone about a fifth of the map in length. So yeah, oh god, it's not a fast one. But I always do enjoy these kind of underdog tanks, and when you do have great results, it's kind of a hell of a lot more rewarding than when you play some of the others that are just blatantly OP, things like Super Conqueror and tanks like that. Yeah, I'd much rather play something like this. And at this point, we kind of make a silly decision. Like, if I was trying to 100% guarantee the win, I would not just cross an open field against the Manticore and an Object 268, but at this point I'm super bored, and that's probably why a lot of people end up getting taken out super quickly in the T110E3, is because you get bored and you start making brash decisions. And when you've got things like an Object 268 that can punish you for the same as you can punish them, then it's really annoying. But you're seeing here, we wait, we kind of slow down a little bit, and of course we bounce off the side of the 268. removing some of the damage that we could have potentially got in this game, and then he gets quickly taken out by our teammates because no more damage for us. And with the Manticore now moving forward, we'll try a little cheeky shot on him. Don't manage to do it. It's always good to do these cheeky shots when you're so far away. There's not much point in kind of shaving the shell, unless you need to guarantee that when they come close, or maybe you're one of 2 tanks left alive and throwing a shell out there, it's probably not the best idea. But with the Manticore now moving forward, we're kind of locked in this position where continually trying to chase down a tank that can do triple our speed is never a good idea. But with the Manticore now coming this way, let's do a little cheeky aim, and of course we bounce off the Manticore, because why not, after bouncing off of the Object 268. So that's 2 tanks we've bounced off of, and it's time to get him. Now let's finally actually hit the Manticore. Maybe we'll do it. No, of course not. It goes into the ground, and the FV4005 on our team decides to stop for a second, and he plows his round into the back of the Manticore, shutting down the game. So not the best result for the T173, but it showcases probably what 90% of your games are going to look like. Even when you have a decent game, you're chasing down damage constantly, and it can feel like you're trying to rip your teeth out, rip your hair out, rip your toenails out. I don't even know at this point, but it is so annoying when you're chasing down damage, especially when you then end up bouncing off of people. Oh, it's a nightmare. But that's the T173. I hope none of you who are wanting to stay sane decide to play it, but if you do decide to play it, take into account all of these things. Definitely use the advanced powertrain to increase your speed and your turning capability in this tank, because you'll definitely need it. And there you go. Hopefully this was a good review of the worst tank in World of Tanks console. But thank you very much. Don't forget to check out some of the other gameplays and tank reviews that we've got on the channel on the left and right hand side of the screen with the video and playlist. And of course, I hope you join me in the next video. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Goodbye.